The critical 24 hours, Russia's massive strike, Ukraine's strained front, and shifting geopolitics. The events unfolding over the last 24 hours are deeply intertwined with the preceding days, particularly Ukraine's drone strike on Russian strategic bomber bases. The most significant development is Russia's execution of another massive combined drone and missile strike across Ukraine overnight. This complex operation involved at least 7 Tu-95MS strategic bombers launching Kh-101 cruise missiles, supported by Tu-22M3 bombers, indicating a strike of considerable scale and coordination. Crucially, this attack was almost certainly not a direct retaliation for the Ukrainian drone strikes on the Angels and Dire G-level air bases a few days prior. Operations of this magnitude require extensive preparation, weeks of target selection, missile programming, bomber crew briefing, and aircraft deployment. The very fact Russia could launch such a comprehensive strike so soon after the Ukrainian attack demonstrates that, regardless of the actual damage inflicted on the bomber bases, Russia's strategic strike capability remains largely intact and unimpeded. Assessing the damage from Ukraine's bomber base attack reveals conflicting narratives. While initial Ukrainian claims suggested significant destruction, subsequent reports, including U.S. intelligence assessments, cited as indicating roughly 20 bombers hit but only about 10 destroyed, paint a more limited picture. Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov's statements strongly implied damage occurred, but no bombers were destroyed beyond repair. Analysis by figures like Simplicius, the thinker, and growing skepticism within Ukraine itself point towards potentially even less damage, with questions raised about manipulated satellite imagery. Regardless of the exact number, whether the initial reports of 3 destroyed Tu-95s or higher estimates, the key takeaway is undeniable. Russia retains a viable strategic bomber force capable of launching devastating attacks like the one witnessed last night. This underscores the attack's fundamental failure to disrupt Russia's pre-existing operational plans, let alone achieve this decisive strategic setback some hope for. Moreover, the sheer destructive impact of Russia's latest strike almost certainly inflicted far greater damage on Ukrainian infrastructure and military assets than Ukraine's drone attacks have managed against Russia, highlighting a critical asymmetry often overlooked. Simultaneously, the military situation on the ground continues to deteriorate rapidly for Ukraine, particularly in the Sumy regions. Reports confirm Russian advances, including the capture of Yablonovka and intense fighting around the heavily fortified Yunarkivka. The atmosphere among Ukrainian defenders is described as one of collapse and despair, with Ukrainian MP Mariana Banzula painting a dire picture. Discussions about evacuating Sumy city itself are now underway, reflecting profound concern. Russian forces, despite operating with forces divided across multiple fronts, Sumy, Kursk, Volgograd, Kharkiv, are making significant progress, exploiting Ukrainian weaknesses. The potential commitment of a large Russian reserve army to this sector later in the summer could multiply Russian forces 5 or 6-fold, raising alarming possibilities, including a renewed Russian approach toward Kyiv by year's end. Russian objectives reportedly aim for control over all Ukrainian territory east of the Dnipro River, including Kharkiv, Sumy, Poltava, Dnipro, Zaporizhzhia, and the rest of Donbass by the end of 2024. While ambitious, The collapse of key Ukrainian defensive lines, coupled with severe manpower and equipment shortage, makes such advances conceivable. Reports also mention potential Russian plans to cross the Dnieper later this summer to retake Kherson City, where Ukrainian defenses are reportedly thin. This Ukrainian collapse is a product of cumulative attrition and overstretch. The need to reinforce collapsing sectors like Konstantinivka and Pokrovsk in Donbass force troop withdrawals from Sumy, creating a cascading effect. Similar pressures are evident across the front. Ukrainian forces driven from Kumashov in southwestern Donbass, Russian breakthrough near Liman, the looming assault on Kharkiv Yar, and advances north of Avdiivka, threatening Konstantinivka from multiple directions. The cumulative weight of Russian pressure is manifesting in a systematic weakening of Ukrainian defenses, with no coherent Western plan to counter it. Geopolitically, Donald Trump's recent phone call with Vladimir Putin appears driven by significant alarm, potentially instigated by his former national security advisor, General Michael Flynn. Flynn reportedly issued stark warning that Ukraine's attack on the bomber bases violated Cold War-era U.S.-Soviet agreement and dangerously escalate nuclear risk. Trump's call likely aimed to reassure Putin that the U.S. and Trump personally were not involved in the strike and to prevent a dangerous Russian escalation. This marks a shift from Trump's previous rhetoric about Putin and suggests a current reluctance within his administration to pursue new sanctions against Russia. Trump's subsequent comments suggesting the U.S. might stand aside as Ukrainian and Russian fight it out because mediation has failed indicate a strategic pause. He may be waiting for the battlefield situation predicted to worsen for Ukraine to create conditions more conducive to future diplomacy. Concurrently, Russia is escalating its rhetoric against the Ukrainian government. Following Putin's earlier statement, his aide Yuri Yushakov and now Senator Andriy Klishas have explicitly labeled the Zelensky's regime a terrorist organization. Klishas stated its official designation is merely a matter of time. This is not a de-escalatory move. It is a highly significant potential upgrade. Designating Ukraine as a terrorist state would legally allow Russia to directly target senior Ukrainian leadership, including Zelensky, and likely transform the special military operation into a full-scale anti-terrorist operation, implying a significant intensification. Russia is also retaliating against perceived Western culprit, particularly the UK, implicated by Russia in supporting attacks. By banning the British Council and launching a campaign warning allies that it functions as an intelligence front. Putin's warning that some Western backers are accessories underscore the rising tension. Ukrainian President Zelensky's defiant stance, asserting the right to strike Russian military targets anywhere, clashes directly with the apparent U.S. desire for restraint under Trump. This highlights how open Western support can conflict with U.S. security interests by enabling actions that risk major escalation. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz's visit to Washington yielded little, perceived as a snub due to the low-key reception and lack of senior officials. It failed to secure U.S. backing for harsher sanctions or long-range weaponry. Trump's resistance to sanctions and his view that the war has entered a phase where the belligerent must fight it out signal a temporary U.S. disengagement from active mediation, likely awaiting a more decisive shift in the conflict's trajectory before re-engaging diplomatically. The Istanbul process appears stalled for now, with the focus shifting decisively to the unfolding military campaign on the ground.